Welcome to my channel, and today we are going to be looking at GraphQL. So what is GraphQL? Basically, it's a query language that allows us to send requests from the client side to our server side. So what we have here is just a simple template. I'm going to be using the Apollo server. So I just use the import Apollo server from the server. I'm going to be dropping down the link to how you can actually install the Apollo server on your terminal. So this is just me having the URL, and it's going to be listening at port 4000. So GraphQL allows us to create a schema, and that is what we are going to do next. So we're just going to be having schema.js. Now, what's the schema about? So this schema will define the type of data that we would use to query our database. So we are just gonna be having export because we want to export the type definition, and the type definition would take in a GraphQL, and we will be putting that into a template literal. So we would give that a type, and we will call this type the game. And then this type is going to have, the type game is going to have an ID, and we will give that an ID, and the exclamation mark next to the ID just stands for required. Next, we're going to have title, and that we're going to have, going to make the title a string, and also we're going to make it required as well. And we're going to have another data type. It's also going to be a string, but we want it to return as an array. So we are going to be creating another type, and this time we are going to be creating a type called the review. So we're just going to give that review and put that in the curly braces, and we want that to have an ID, and we want that to be required as well, and we want to also give it a rating, and we want the rating to be an integer, but we want that to be required too, and we want content, and we would give that a string and required as well. So we've got the game, we've got the review. Now we want to create another type, and then we can create an author, and we want our author to have an ID, and we'll just have that as an ID. And we also want our author to have a name, so we'll put that as a string. And we also want our author to be verified. So we would make that a Boolean, and we will make all of our data types required. So we then want to have a query type. So we'll have that, and then we'll have query, and we would put that into a curly braces, and then we have games, and we would set that to an array of games. So basically what we are saying is that when we do query for games, we want a list of all the games in our game object. So the next is the reviews. So we're going to set that to a review. So just like the game, we also want a list of the reviews. And then authors, we'll set that to author as well. So now we have created both our game, the review, the author, and the query. So now we have our schema that we can then use in our index.js file. One really good thing about GraphQL is that it allows us, compared to the traditional REST API, it allows us to actually query a single item. So say, for example, we had a list of movies and those movies had titles, and under those movies you had directors. With GraphQL, you can decide to say you want just the title of the movie. So what this does is that it prevents overfetching and also underfetching, so thereby giving you the exact data that you need in your application. So what we are just going to do here is we're just going to import the type definition. And when we say type definition, we meant the schema we just created. So the different data types we created in the schema file. So we are just going to import that into our index.js file. And then the next thing we want to also create is we want to create a database file as well. So basically where we have all of our data. So I have it stored somewhere. I have the all the data. So I'm just going to go there and copy all of those data that we're going to use for the database, and I'm just going to paste that there. So now we have the data for games, we have for authors, and we have for reviews. So now I can then import that file into our index.js file. So I am just going to comment that that's the data and import db from db.js. So from db, yeah. So now we have both our schema, which is our type definitions, and we have our database in our index.js file. So I can come over to the where I have the server and then just comment that out, since we already have that. So the next thing we want to create is a resolver. Now, what's a resolver? So basically, the resolver are functions that determine how the data is defined in our schema. So that's what we need to create next in our index.js file. So we are just going to have const resolver, and then so for GraphQL, it uses the query, and then inside our curly braces, I'm just going to call games, and I'm just simply going to return. So I'm just going to say return and db dot games. And I'm also going to create another one for authors as well. So these resolvers will be responsible for fetching the data from our DB. So then we are just going to have author, and we are going to set that to have a curly braces and return, and it will be db dot author as well. One also good thing about GraphQL is that we can also have mutations. So basically, these mutations allow us to create data and update data, as well as delete data that we no longer want in our database. So we have our resolver now, we have the game, we have the author, and we have reviews as well. So now that we have our resolver variable, which we just created, we can actually come down to our solver where we had the type definitions as well, and we can just comment that out since we now have our resolvers. So we can then, the resolvers are actually associated with each field in the schema, and then they are executed when a query or mutation is made. So basically, when we make any mutation, which as I said earlier, the mutations are when we update the data, or we delete the data, or we create the data. So the next step we want to do is listen at port 4000. So we're just going to go to our terminal, and then we are going to be using Node. So we have Node, and I'm going to be referencing the index page. So that gives us our local host to listen at port 4000, which we had set it to in our index file. So we are just going to go to our index file, and that takes us to the Apollo server. And here we have our query, and we can change that to anything. But what's important is looking at each of the fields. So making sure that all of the fields we had created is actually there. And as you can see, we have the author, we have the game, and we have the review as well. So the next step that we would want to do is actually see how this works, how this actually plays out, right? So we will be doing some query. One of the good things about GraphQL, again, is that it allows us to query nested data. So we can change the name to anything, but I'm just going to be giving it author query. And so the first query we want to do is let's do the authors, and we can say we want an author name. We can also find out if the author is verified, and we also want an ID as well. So we're just going to hit the require query button to get the response, and as you can see, we get the response to that query that we just made. So that gives us all of that information that we requested for. So let's play around with this. Let's still test our query. So we just did for authors. So we might want to switch that up. We also have games. So let's say we want the game, we want the platform, and maybe we want the ID. Yes, we want the ID as well. And so we can just hit the query button, and that will give us a list of all of the platforms and the IDs as well. So these are just the easy way of actually getting, and also too, if we just want only the ID as well, so that also gives us the ID. So this is also a really good way of getting a single data. So rather than having so much data that you don't need, using GraphQL can actually reduce the overfetching of data for you. So the next query we want to do is the review, and we can have all of that as well. We've got the review, we've got the rating, we've got the ID. So the key concepts of GraphQL are the schema, the queries, the mutations, the resolvers, and we can say the endpoints. So now we are just going to do some more queries. Let's see how it all, we want probably maybe all of the data that we created. So this one is just for, so let's say we want authors, and we want type name, and we want the name as well, and we want want to check if it's verified, and we also want the gains. So we want all of the data, and we would choose of course the platform field, the ID, and we'll also have the reviews as well, and then we can have type name, we can include the content, and we would include the rating, so, and of course the ID. So that gives us all of the data that we had created in our schema and in our index.js file. So this is how GraphQL is used. Of course, there are more ways of, like I mentioned earlier, the mutations where we can use it to create data. We can actually update data. We can actually delete.